Trying to grab all the groceries in one trip? Oof, not how you would have done that. You know sometimes less is more. Like when you drive less and save with the USAA annual mileage discount. USAA. Get a quote today.
Same old man. Here's Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review episode for April 7th, 2023. I am Brendan Cassidy.
And I'm Ryan McQuaid.
Thanks for joining us this week, everyone, for this review of Air, a pair of airheads reviewing Air for you, breathing in that air, trying to throw the puns as much as possible. I'm trying to take over these dad puns that, JD taking his time off, Jay not here right now. I feel like we need to practice up, man. We need to practice up to cover those puns for sure.
Yeah, no, and especially today, because if you can see behind me, like I was telling you, Brendan, I'm a lonely dungeon in this dragon atmosphere. Or maybe I'm in this I'm a lonely dragon in this dungeon. Anyway, I am completely
saved that
tired.
one for our Dungeons and Dragons episode.
I should have. I'm completely tired, but I'm unhinged because I'm excited. I don't know what the puns are anymore. I'm gonna leave that to you. But
you just want to talk this movie. I already know your thoughts on this.
I'm ready. I'm like, put me in, coach. I'm ready to dribble. You know what I mean? I'm ready
I think
we're
gonna be throwing out as many, I guess, dad rock songs as we can. We've already been singing Sister Christian in the background.
Hell yeah.
Motorin'.
Yeah.
Thankfully, it is in this movie and not just the marketing for it. But yeah, I too am looking forward to getting into this review of Air. I tried to go a little sporty for this episode, a little bit more than usual. I didn't quite have a UNC Chapel Hill shirt, but I do have one for UNC Wilmington. So I'm at least representing Michael Jordan in some way. My fiance actually went to UNCW, so I had a spare Under Armour shirt for that. So trying to represent at least a little bit, but we are, of course, talking about Air. The next effort from Ben Affleck as a director, his first since 2016, I think, was Live by Night, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the movie that we all still talk about.
Not for the best reasons if people still do talk about that one. But yeah, not his best effort as a director. And up until that point, we were celebrating Ben Affleck as one of the better actors turned directors of the past decade, really, even really the century, if you really think about it and stretch it back that far. I mean, by the time he had Live by Night done, he had already won a Best Picture Oscar for Argo. So he was doing very well as a director, and it's nice to see him come back, step away from the DCEU or whatever the hell it's called right now to, direct
Talk about a dungeon.
Talking about a dungeon, a different kind of dungeon, a very moist dungeon.
Yeah. Very fanboy sweaty dungeon. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. But yes, the next directorial effort from Ben Affleck is called Air. It was also written by Alex Convery, who is a name I don't think many people are familiar with, but I think we'll be talking about this name for quite a while. This is his first ever film credit. If you look at IMDb, this individual only has one film, and it's Air. It's this is one of those scripts that came from the Blacklist, and we'll have a lot to say about the writing here. The film stars Matt Damon, of course. It's a Ben Affleck movie. Of course, they're going to be working together once again. But Matt Damon's in this alongside Ben Affleck, Jason Bateman, Chris Messina, Chris Tucker, Viola Davis, and Marlon Wayans in a short but effective scene, which we'll probably talk about as well. And this is a true story. The film takes place in 1984 and follows the history of Sonny Vaccaro and how he led Nike in its pursuit of basketball legend Michael Jordan. And I'm excited to get into this conversation, Ryan. And I know that you saw this one a little while ago, and you've been, I guess, to spoil a little bit of it, you've been singing its praises pretty loudly. So I'm looking forward to getting your thoughts and seeing what banter we have from this. So why do you love breathing this air so much?
Ooh, yeah, I like to breathe this in. I like to take it in.
Take it in.
Okay, Brendan. So we talk about movies all the time, right? We talk about movies for a living here on this podcast.
Yeah.
We talk about movies that excite us. Talk about movies that also don't get made a lot. We talk about movies that make us feel things. We talk about movies that inspire us. We talk about movies that truly just we would like to see more. All those categories that I just mentioned and then some is Ben Affleck's Air. This is a kind of a surprising little miracle of a movie that doesn't get made anymore. This is a movie that gets made in the early 2000s, late 90s. We hear about it, we see it, we find it on VHS or DVD, and we obsess over it. And it's the kind of movie that we go, man, it's got a great screenplay by somebody that we don't even know who it is.
Right.
It's directed by a director that we can rely on, because say what you want about Live by Night, it's okay to have a stinker in your career. Every director's got a stinker.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I often wonder why that was such a stinker, because watching that film that came out, at times it didn't even feel like a Ben Affleck directed film when you look at the procedural elements that were so great about Gone Baby Gone and Argo, and how contemporary that they almost felt more like 70s thrillers. So
yeah.
Maybe the sense of place in Live by Night was just not really in Ben Affleck's wheelhouse. He definitely seemed a little out of his element there.
I think also too, the thing about Affleck you have to remember is like 2016, 17, a lot's going on in his life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to try to rehash a lot of it, but he's going through a divorce, massive depression, his alcoholism. It's all been on the record.
Yep.
So he's gone through a lot since the last time he was behind the camera.
Yeah.
And he's in his personal life and professionally, then there's obviously everything that happened with the Snyder Cut and all that stuff in the DCU, and it really kind of, and he was he was kind of excited to do a Batman movie, and then it fell apart, and that's how we ended up getting the Batman last year. Is Matt Reeves took it in that property in an entirely different direction. And so he's just been kind of, it was a lot. And this kind of happens sometimes to directors, Gone Baby Gone was such a surprise in 2008 because no one really thought, oh, Ben Affleck's doing directing a movie, like, okay. And then it was actually really good. And then The Town is another one of those movies where you watch it and you're just like, oh, I forgot, like, oh, he's doing one. Oh, okay. Sure, show me it. Oh, it's a movie with Boston and bank robbers. Okay. And it's actually really solid.
It's a good thriller. It's a good thriller.
Yeah, it's really good. Good procedural. Yeah. And then Argo comes out. He's riding off of those two. And he wins Best Picture. Should have probably got nominated for Best Director. And that's probably why he won that Best Picture Oscar, is because a lot of sympathy votes that why he didn't get it, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, and he still won an Oscar for the film anyway, despite not being nominated for director, because he was a producer on it. So I guess it kind of worked out in his favor to at least give him a statue. Yeah.
And therein lies, I think, like the moment right there where like it kind of started to feel weird for Ben Affleck, because there's that speech. If you ever go back and watch that Argo speech, he starts going kind of like wild and crazy in that thing, and there's a lot in that speech, and he's talking about his marriage and all this different stuff, and then of course his marriage falls apart and all that other stuff that I just mentioned. So it's interesting to like find ourselves here in 2022 to find him behind the camera again for something that oozes optimism, because really the last time we saw Ben Affleck in a lead performance was right before the pandemic. And it was in The Way Back, a movie that was very personal to him. Yeah. Another basketball movie from Gavin O'Connor.
Yeah. I guess
I know he was in the school, but
what about Deep Water, the film with Ana de Armas? Does that even really count? Because it's kind of a co-lead thing.
It's kind of a co-lead thing, but like that truly felt like Gavin O'Connor and him are making it's not him making a directorial film, but it's very personal to him. That whole movie seemed very personal.
That felt kind of like Ben Affleck's version of a personal meta movie. There was a lot that he was channeling internally for that.
It reminded me a lot of like, not that they're saying they're like the similar thing, but it reminded me a lot of like when we were talking about the movie star draft last week. It reminded me a lot of what Paul Newman and his research and everything went into for The Verdict. And then the Met had all these ideas and everything about how to play it. And Paul Newman's like, no, I know how to play this because I've been this. Right. I've been this low. I know what an alcoholism is. So it was a lot. It was very personal film. The movie's fine overall, but like the performance in it is a pretty incredible performance from Ben Affleck. So to go low, then you have to get back up. You know what I mean? And this story is one of the most, I would say, important stories of the modern era to ever do. Because Michael Jordan's story, reason why, like, and I know this is something that, you know, a lot of people debate. This is an ongoing debatable story. Who's the greatest athlete of all time? And who's particularly the greatest basketball player of all time? And it's been going on a lot this year because of obviously LeBron James breaking the scoring record from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and all that different stuff.
Yep.
And I make the argument that, like, okay, yes, I understand LeBron's a great player. You know, top 5, top 10 player, however you want to debate. There's been a lot of great players. But Michael Jordan is the GOAT for a reason like this. This movie is a testament, even more so than the documentary The Last Dance. This is a testament to why Michael Jordan's legacy is special.
It's interesting how a movie like this is able to get into that legacy more effectively without even ever showing Michael Jordan himself.
Bingo. Because it's about what that feeling did of greatness, and the idea of greatness did for his future, for this company's future, for Sonny Vaccaro, everything that he's kind of put on there. But also, when you look at it even further than this, Brendan, this is a history defining deal for the fashion industry, for capitalism, if you want to go that far, for shoes in general, but also for the modern American athlete. If this deal does not happen, they don't have the brands that they do, because it's literally shown, like, there's that great scene in the film between Matt Damon and Viola Davis where he is literally explaining how Converse and how Adidas is going to pitch Michael in their meetings.
Yeah.
And it is going to be like that for perpetuity, because that's how they make money, not how the athletes make money. And what I loved about this so much, it reminded me of why I love Moneyball, why I love movies like The Social Network, is that using the past and showing that the future that we now hold, because like there are athletes now that literally represent themselves. They don't have agents anymore. They literally represent themselves. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is another topic for another day.
Yep.
They don't get that if a deal like this doesn't get made. And then on the other side, you're talking about a company and people that, way back when, Nike wasn't always, the Oregon Ducks' mascots, literally, and all these different, and the brand that they are today. It all is created by that. And so this whole disingenuous argument already online about this movie, before it even came out, like, people are like, oh, they're making a movie about a shoe. And I saw people, make jokes about, the brand of this movie and what it should be called and all this different stuff.
That's the thing. Like, did these people not know that at one point in 1984 that the market share for Nike was way below Converse? Like,
it was absurdly low, to the point where if this deal doesn't happen, basketball shoes and the basketball brand and the sport of basketball does not exist the way it does today. Period.
It's a genre defying business model, really. And that's why I think comparing it to The Social Network is fair, because it kind of carries that stigma, like, oh, they're making a movie about Facebook. What could that have to say? Oh, they're making a movie about a Nike shoe. What could that have to say? Where in actuality, it doesn't just redefine the business model for sports, as you're saying, but the fashion industry as well. I mean, in many ways, it's sort of what kickstarts many of these other athletic brands to try and compete with Nike going forward. I mean, that's why we see brands like Lululemon all over the place too. It's in many ways, it's sort of an indirect responsibility of that.
Those Spike Lee commercials, it's the shoes, and everything that we kind of see a glimpse towards the end of the film. That's all because of this deal. So that's all the context you need as an audience member, not even needing to be a basketball fan to know.
You don't need it. No.
How important this movie is and what the stakes are. And even though we know what the stakes are, just like in The Social Network, we know what happens.
Yeah.
We know what happens to the Oakland A's. We know what happens to most of these things. We know what happens, but the reason why it's so compelling is because Ben Affleck is behind the camera and confidently directing the shit out of this thing. I mean, this is the kind of swerve that masters behind the cameras give us all the time. It's got great editing, commanding performances. Every single one of these actors are absolutely knocking their performances out of the park. From somebody like what is it? Marlon Wayans? Right?
Marlon Wayans, yeah, he has
Yeah.
one
He's
scene in this movie.
one scene at a
Yeah.
bar, and it rules.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's
Chris
he's
Tucker.
playing. Who's he playing again? What's his name? I'm completely blanking on. George Raveling. Yeah, who was the men's Olympic coach at the time for basketball Olympic coach.
Then you've got Chris Tucker, who's coming in and just delivering great jokes, but then being great levity to Matt Damon's frenetic performance, which I gotta say this. I know that Matt Damon gets a lot of hate, but I gotta tell you,
He's a reliable actor. He's good.
He's so good in this movie. Like, it's ridiculous how good he is here. Bateman's fantastic. Messina coming in for his couple scenes and devouring the screen. It is incredible what Messina's doing. I love the performance.
Young audiences who see this are going to be quoting lines from Chris Messina probably in a couple years. I could see this movie catching on in like the VOD era. I could really see, dads introducing this to their sons, and then these young minds being like, "Oh, that kind of talk, that kind of snappy dialogue.
That's what I want to do.
I want to quote that." I mean, now granted, maybe they shouldn't be at a certain age because it's very profane, things we won't see here on this podcast. But
no, but it's
still,
so like
that's how good the dialogue is.
Yeah, and then of course, Affleck's in this himself. I think he's great. More wild, kooky Ben Affleck performances, please. Like this in The Last Duel. He just knows how to do this. He's balancing that tone perfectly. He's great. But Viola Davis, when they originally had the script, she really only had a couple lines. They fleshed that character out. This might be one of Viola Davis's best performances. She really is great alongside Matt Damon in
very subtle
the
performance,
scenes.
which I like.
Yeah, it's completely different than a lot of the stuff she's been doing in the last couple of years too.
Yeah.
And she's coming in with the and card, like the and card where you get like, and Viola Davis.
The legendary. I mean, Chris Tucker has the legendary with. So
yeah, he's got the with.
I feel like you get ranked. You either get a with or you get promoted to an and.
Yeah, and if you get that and, you got to earn it, and she totally earns that and. But I mean, again, this editing's fantastic. A soundtrack that, listen, if you think that like this movie's got way too many songs in it, I don't know what to tell you. This movie
have worked. It should not have worked.
It shouldn't have worked.
Opens for money. It opens with "Money for Nothing" by Dire Straits. I mean, you can't get more obvious than that. And yet,
exactly,
I'm sitting there during the opening credits, like, yeah, this is.
This is exactly the kind of. Yeah, it's like a blend of like PTA, Scorsese, Linklater, all these directors that Affleck grew up at a time with, that admired and everything, and yet it's like, okay, Ben Affleck's movies, the first three, they were entertaining because they had a flow to them, they had an energy to them, they had a clear distinction behind the camera. Live by Night does not have that. That movie is like devoid of a soul. It feels like
that's passionless. It's meandering. It's all over the place.
Exactly. And this movie, you feel it from the get-go. You feel it before you see a frame because you hear that song. You hear Money for Nothing. And you're like...
and now, to be fair, the songs are pretty obvious. I mean,
they're pretty obvious.
Well, which is not a bad thing. I mean, what did they use to introduce Ben Affleck as Nike CEO Phil Knight? They call him Shoe Dog, which then transitions to Atomic Dog by George Clinton.
It's fine. But but again, it shouldn't work, but it does. And the reason why it does is because the one thing you can say about this movie, Brendan, is the movie is sincere. The movie is sincere in what it's trying to do. It's not trying to be some crazy Nike commercial that some people might think it was early going into it, or trying to think it's like something to build up Michael Jordan's credibility as like the greatest athlete of all time.
Yeah.
It's a movie literally about a business that is making a deal. If you would have said this is about a fictional story about getting a once in a generation basketball player, take Nike and take Michael Jordan out of it,
Yeah.
take him out of it. It would still be a very fascinating, interesting story. And yet, when it has those extra components to it, it's a great movie. It takes it even to another level. I really love this movie. I think this is one of the best movies of the year. And I think this might be, I have it slotted right now as this might be Affleck's best work because
Interesting.
this might be the most confident he's ever been behind the camera. He's having a lot of fun. It reminds me, I mentioned all those other directors. It reminds me a little bit of like Soderbergh too. A sense of like, I'm collecting all my friends together. I'm doing something, but yet it looks really easy to get this kind of film done. But yet I know this took a lot out of him to make. And when he was at South by Southwest, you felt that sincerity from the moment he was speaking about the film, and then you see it on the screen. This is kind of a like surprising revelation of a little movie, because you would think all the cynical bones in your body would want to reject it, but it's really good. Movies are good.
It feels like kind of like a course correction after Live by Night, and especially everything that Ben Affleck has gone through since that film. We mentioned some of the things in his personal life, or at least you did. It does feel like he's trying to find some sense of optimism and imbue it into his filmmaking, because you're right, this is a very optimistic film, and it's a very simple film. You know, it kind of disregards some of the usual tropes we tend to see from movies like this. One of the things I really like that I think many might see as a criticism is that we get very little in the way of what life is like for these people outside of work. I mean, this is 110% an office movie. It's very much flowing from conference room to meeting room to office building to maybe a 7-Eleven or something like that. But we rarely see any home life. The only thing we really get is a little bit with regard to Jason Bateman as Rob Strasser and the relationship that he has with his daughter, and how that's revealed during his birthday while they're still working over the weekend. But that's I weirdly respect that this is trying to look at the optimistic side of a topic like capitalism, which tends to be a very negative topic for many people nowadays. And this shows that it could still be a good thing. Yeah, I think this is really good. If I haven't said that yet, I'm going to say it now. I think it's a very good movie. It's kind of one of those movies that's hard to dislike.
Yeah,
honestly,
you dislike this, you've got a lot of cynicism in your life, and sorry, Brendan. This is just like a really good time at the movies.
Yeah,
it's a crowd pleaser, and that's okay to say that.
It weirdly reminded me of Ridley Scott's The Martian in some ways, which coincidentally starred Matt Damon. I mean, it's not as grand as that movie, but they're both very charming process movies about people being very good at their jobs, and they don't rely on one's knowledge of whatever subject it's depicting, whether it be mathematics or basketball in this case. It actually does a great job sort of educating you on the minutia and the handlings of it all. I mean, for those of us who follow the sport, we can laugh at the jokes about Gonzaga, for instance. But in a way, it's written in a way that if you're not familiar with that, you kind of learn something from it, which I respect the film almost operating as this maybe inadvertent like educational piece. And on top of that, the movie's really funny. You know, this is a very funny movie. A lot of that credit has to go to Alex Convery. We didn't really mention his name yet. But this was one of those so-called blacklisted scripts, but the writing here is kind of amazing. I mean, the dialogue is snappy and witty without ever feeling phony. And again, maybe a lot of that is also credit to these performances for finding some way to ground the snappiness and the wittiness into something that feels very earnest and sincere, as you're saying. And that's what I like about Ben Affleck's direction as well. It's more subdued. It's a bit more restrained when compared to the energy of, let's say, The Town or Argo. I think at this point, I still prefer Gone Baby Gone and maybe Argo. I mean, like, the thing about Argo is the way that it sort of plays with the tropes of movies to make a movie about movies. I mean, one of the common things about the ending of Argo is that it's kind of untrue. Like, he sort of fabricated a chase sequence out of it just to make a movie about making movies, when in actuality, these hostages waited at the airport to board a plane to get out of there. And I kind of love that. It might seem sort of gimmicky, but I love that movie sort of played with those tropes in a smart
yeah.
way, which I love that energy. And I think that's why maybe at this point, Air is probably my third place film for Ben Affleck. But then again, I mean, like, he's got 4 out of 5 hits. I mean, that's pretty darn good. Even The Town, like I think The Town's a very effective thriller, probably like a 3.5 out of 5 star movie on Letterboxd for me. But yeah, this is very good, and I'm glad to see this this kind of course correction for him and really take a step back, be a bit more restrained, and that's something we love to see from directors. You know, the bigger you go doesn't always mean better or even more skilled. Sometimes it takes a lot to take a back seat and know what is operating well for your story. And Affleck does that very well here.
Well, also too, you know, when you go bigger, that doesn't mean you have to have a giant scale. Like
Right.
this has the feelings of a director that's going big in the confidence meter,
Yeah.
but is shrinking it down to this one building for the most part of your entirety within the film. Like 85 to 90% of this movie is in that Nike headquarters building, like you're mentioning, Brendan. And you do get
Even a lot of close-ups as well, sometimes just focusing on people's eyes. So it's very simply shot.
Yeah. It's
but
not
it's
trying
not
to
a
do
bad
anything.
thing.
No, it's not trying to go overcomplicated. You don't have to. This is a story where the emotions are the main character. The determination to get this deal done. You don't need to have like whiz bam boom, all these like giant set pieces.
Yeah.
And like, again, has another one of my favorite things where it's a basketball movie that doesn't have a lot of basketball in it. Like the only basketball scene you get is at the beginning of the film. And it's at like this tournament that's in the backdrop of Sonny doing his scouting. That's the only basketball you really
you
get
don't
in
even
this
really
movie.
see any basketball. You basically see the bleachers is more or less what you really, I mean, to that point, the only true basketball scene you see is the analytical footage of Michael Jordan playing for of him playing at UNC Chapel Hill. And the way that Sonny is analyzing why Jordan is such a necessity for that team, and it's something that many people, many fans in general, might overlook. And I love the analytical side of that. That's where I think the film actually does a really good job, you know, almost operating as an educational piece on the sport of basketball in some ways. I could see young viewers watching that scene for the first time who aren't really into sports and think, oh, I want to get into basketball now. And but that's kind of awesome, right? Like, it's kind of awesome to structure a scene like that in an inspirational way. And I think that's really cool.
No, for sure. I mean, you're talking about essentially when someone figured out that Michael Jordan was going to be the star that he was.
Yeah.
You know, from a major talent evaluator level, because
by simply scoring a final 3-pointer, but it was more complicated than that.
But also too, it's like, oh, well, if you can figure that out, then why didn't they figure it out? It's like Michael Jordan still went 3 in that draft.
Yeah.
That's what's crazy about that too. It's like Sam Bowie went ahead of him. Obviously, Akeem Olajuwon, great player. Akeem Olajuwon, Sam Bowie, one of the biggest busts of all time.
Yeah.
But Jordan going 3 to the Bulls, it was a foregone conclusion. That whole draft was kind of a foregone conclusion. But this idea of like, okay, I didn't know, Brendan, that they essentially had only a certain amount of, when you have a certain amount of budget, you can go after these guys like that.
Yeah.
I think it was also informative for basketball fans in general too, not just beyond what you mentioned, which is a fantastic scene of breaking down when Damon goes to Bateman's office as to why they're going to put their whole purse in for Michael Jordan, because the idea of this is to land 3 players that they can use as you know, and split up their money that way.
Yeah, which from a revenue standpoint, that makes more sense to do it that way. So
makes more sense. And for Nike at the time, these are minimal contracts that I'm like, you know, it was funny. They're mentioning guys in there, right? That were like potential Hall of Famers or became Hall of Famers. They mentioned John Stockton, I think, at one point. Charles Barkley was mentioned at one point. They mentioned a ton of players. And, you know, Vaccaro, who stated it by the end of the film, but is known as one of the great basketball minds of all time behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Great evaluator of talent. And also a big advocate for something that this movie does, which is athletes' right to own their brand and own them. And we live in a time right now where, NIL money is a big thing in college sports. You have a lot of athletes taking their own autonomy and their own sort of place in trying to monetize as best they can. Really, we are living in an era now where back then corporations and teams had a lot more ownership over the power of the sport. And now we live in a time where the athlete is the one that drives everything going forward. You know what I mean? It's a lot like that directors and actors have more power nowadays, I think, than even sometimes studios, because they're not going from Paramount Studios anymore. They're going from director Christopher Nolan, you know what I mean? Or whatever, or director Ben Affleck in this case. So like they have the business with inside Hollywood has changed. And I can understand also, like, there have been complaints about, like, well, how does this generation feel about, because they use, what is Ben Affleck's generation? It's not millennials, right before it's Gen X.
Yeah, Gen X.
The Gen X is like against the power and establishment and everything and all that, like fight the man and all this stuff. But now they're like embracing sort of like this simple capitalistic idea. And it's like, well, because at the time, the athlete, as you can clearly see, is being manipulated by a corporation. This is the most anti sort of corporation tactic to ever do. Risk everything, people's jobs, all, and then give him literally revenue from the shoe within itself. A deal that they mentioned in the film that it's never even happened before.
Yeah.
And it all is
still
because
make money off of it. Yeah.
So make money off of it.
You can have your cake and eat it too.
But also the thing about the movie is it's that, how is all that possible? It's because somebody believed. Sonny Vaccaro believes in him. And Matt Damon's performance is so captivating because it can be seen as a madman possessed, but it's also about something that you have that gut instinct. We all have that gut instinct inside of us. I believe in something so strong. And it may sound completely conjecture. It may sound like, I've been wrong a million times, because they say that Sonny's been wrong.
Yeah, his track record's not very good.
But when you land that one thing, it can be historic. And that's what this deal was. And I was sitting there going, like, thinking about kind of like when I was watching Social Network and Moneyball, even watching something like High Flying Bird from Soderbergh a couple of years ago. The idea of how history has played out since the story that's been told here, and how that is all played out, and how it's all, it is a true story. But even beyond this, once this movie releases, how something like the stories of what Michael Jordan and other athletes at this time carried on, what's the next 10 years? Because analytics over the last 10 years has been this great giant thing that's happened. And I think Moneyball is a movie that kind of, even in 2011, we weren't fully into the analytic game nearly as much. The next thing we're going to see is, from a deal like this, or inspiration from something like this, could be, I'm not saying this movie is going to move a mountain or anything, but it'll be interesting to tell how the future of sports goes, even from just this inception point of how it changed for the modern athlete. And it's really interesting about that.
I think that's a great point. I don't know how, I guess, foreseeing this movie will be, or how far it's going to look ahead and what it's going to influence. But I mean, we have conversations offline between those of us at InSession Film for the podcast here about, with regard to college football, especially, we always talk about, man, why aren't they paying the players? Why the players should be getting paid. And because of how this film references collegiate sports very directly at times, it makes me think, I wonder if this film really is as successful as I think it could be. Could it also help kickstart those conversations? And maybe it could, because it is sort of tapping into that capitalistic mindset and how it can relate to the world of sports, but in an earnest and sincere way that isn't just about governing a business, if that makes sense. And I do like how this film is trying to have its cake and eat it too in that regard, which is why I kind of respect how the film doesn't get too bogged down by the personal lives of these I'll say characters. I mean, they're all people in real life, but characters in this movie. And that would be a normal complaint for not just me, but I think a lot of critics, that it should be a bit more gray and less black and white, because we know that this is going to work out well, and the film doesn't really have a lot of conflict leading. There's some conflict for sure, and there's some tension, and there's a thrilling nature about it, but it never really tries to trick you into thinking that the deal is going to fall through and not work out. And which I kind of like about that. Really, like I mentioned before, the one scene where we notice that there is some ramifications here, that Sonny Vaccaro is not just bringing upon himself, but everyone at this company. In many ways, he's going to be dragging down multiple careers for other people if this doesn't work out. And that's the scene with Rob Strasser and his daughter on his birthday. I mean, we don't see his daughter, but he talks about how he only gets to see her on Sundays due to his divorce, and their relationship is built on him bringing her Nike shoes. It's a very sweet and tender moment, but if we got more of that to kind of, I guess, dwell in the potential darkness of this, in any other movie, I would say that's something we need. But in this case, I'm kind of glad we don't have that. I think this film does a really good job playing with dramatic irony, which is usually a narrative trope I don't like, while how it puts characters or puts people like us as viewers many steps ahead of the characters in the story. But here, I think it plays with that trope very well by cueing us in on things we always assumed about Nike, but then telling us, yeah, you're kind of wrong for assuming that. Nike was not a big brand in the early 80s. It was a running company. It was strictly a running company. Yeah. And that was it. At the time, market share was 17% compared to Converse at somewhere in the 50s. Even Adidas was somewhere in the 20s. So it had a lot of legwork to try and catch up on. And that's something we never really knew about. It's not publicized in our generation because we always associate Nike as like the brand. Like that's how we see it. So I think the film plays with dramatic irony really interestingly, and I love that it avoids the normal dark sides of these potential choices that characters like this can make.
No, for sure. And I mean, the movie isn't about these people, even though that these people
it's about the stuff they do. Really, I mean, they're compelling.
About the deal.
Yeah,
the deal is the central focus. And yes, Sonny Vaccaro is completely behind it, but Sonny Vaccaro is, like we see, he's got a house. He's very well off.
Yeah.
But he lives alone. He's taken literally the tape from The Office home with him, putting in a microwavable dinner, and watching the tape over and over and over again.
Sorry to interrupt, but you bring up a great point that I didn't really realize, but the film does very directly mention it, and that's the idea of putting your work first to the point that you're kind of on your own because of it. Chris Messina as Jordan's agent, David Falk, constantly makes jokes about how he'll always be living or eating alone, and there's even a direct visual gag about that towards the end of the movie.
Hilarious,
and I mean,
and it's also sad too.
And it's
great.
Isn't that kind of representative of every character here? I mean, I guess we assume that like they are because we don't see any of their personal lives outside of the office, but we hear about Rob Strasser and the fact that he's divorced and rarely sees his daughter. Sonny Vaccaro looks to be living alone. So it's like there's a sense of isolation and putting work first that is, it's really compelling to see in this way. And I like that it doesn't become preachy to say that that's right or wrong. It's just, it just is what it is.
Well, like a movie like Moneyball, that's about Billy Beane. More than it is even about analytics or the Oakland A's or everything that happened that season. Yeah. That movie is fundamentally a movie about Billy Beane.
Right.
Like from the get-go. You know what I mean? So that's why when you see stuff with his daughter and you see the behind the scenes stuff and everything about his life and everything, like you understand what they're doing, what Ben Miller's doing there. He's making a movie about a man, like a man who is trying to do something against all odds.
Yeah.
Kind of like what Damon's here doing, but it's more of a complete story about that specific time and what he's trying to do, what Billy Beane wants, because it's about Billy Beane. You see not only the stuff with his daughter, you see about how he was a failed draft pick and all these different things that go into that.
Yeah.
This is about essentially, yes, it's about a company, but it's about this man, Sonny Vaccaro, and the deal he wants to make. And the deal overtakes that because then everyone buys in off of belief. The number one thing that this movie is about is belief. They all believe in Sonny because they don't have a choice, but also too because
he didn't really give them a choice.
He doesn't really give them a choice, but also he's making so many compelling points, and his job is for them to believe in him.
That's the thing.
That is the fundamental thing about his job, Brendan, is they have to buy into what he's selling because he's an analyst essentially for them.
He's a sales analyst. He's a marketer. And these kind of people in these roles, their job is to convince you that they're right. That's more or less what they're doing. And sometimes in the case of this, you kind of have to go through unethical ways to make that point convincing. And and Sonny Vaccaro does that. He goes around the agent David Falk to speak directly to the Jordans in North Carolina, which is very much a no-no.
You don't do that. No.
That is
even now. You don't do that nowadays. Even
I think nowadays you get fired for that. I mean,
no. If you went around an agent like that and did that even nowadays, it's like, oh, that guy, we're not making a deal with him at all.
It would seem too pressuring. And I feel like that would shoot yourself in the foot unless you have a really good case to argue in favor of your business model, like Sonny Vaccaro does here. He just knows the business. He knows exactly what Converse and Adidas are going to say to try and bring Jordan into their contract, and he's not wrong about that. So he clearly is able to put his money where his mouth is, and he backs it up with truth, which is good.
Yeah, and then also too, like, I mean, Michael, the figure of Michael Jordan in this movie, and his family, they buy in because, yes, the presentation does not really go well. But what is it?
I love that the presentation is kind of a disaster.
It is kind of a disaster. But like, what are the two things that get sold to Mike by the end that ultimately most likely makes this deal? It is Vaccaro's belief in his future, which is, if you know Michael Jordan, that's all he really needed to hear, essentially. Because Michael Jordan, while a great athlete, one of the biggest egos ever on the planet.
Yeah, that's fair. I
took that personally. You know what I mean? But you see that shoe, and you see that the sweet deal that they're willing to do. I mean, even there's a great moment where they're like, "Yeah, we'll eat the cost of your fines," and Phil Knight, played by Ben Affleck, kind of goes, "Oh, we will."
Okay. Again, speaking of the ethics of the business model here, they're making choices without even running it by the CEO of the company.
It's great. And I mean, but also too, like, you mentioned that this is a running company. How is this decision even like able to get a go? What does Phil Knight have to go do? Let's go for a run. That's the thing about it. And it's a great scene because then one, you get Affleck in that ridiculous haircut and in those shorts.
And that purple car.
But you also get the sense of, no, I believe in you. There's a ton of pushback, obviously. You guys have been here all weekend. You're taking this more seriously than you did the last time you tried to make a sort of wild pitch like this.
Yeah.
You've gone and met with his coaches. Chris Tucker has sort of like a player relations sort of, connection to him as well. Evidently Chris Tucker knew his character in real life too, so was able to tap into that. And,
interesting. I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. That was the thing. It's like, he kind of knew about Michael in this deal as well. And a lot of the great stuff about the screenplay, which it's really is a great first time screenplay.
Yeah.
Then a lot of the stuff was then ad-lib. And if you read what happened in an interview recently, it was revealed, and this is what I think about this movie is even special behind the camera as it is in front of the camera sometimes, Brendan. You can't really factor that in, but and it goes to Affleck's sincerity with these characters as well as with this entire project. This was a script that was it was a spec script, but it had the bones of what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
A lot of the sort of quippy, fun dialogue is added in by these actors. He kind of adds it back in, and they rework it all together. It was a big work project together, and Affleck and Damon obviously helped him behind the scenes too, just like any director or producers would do. But when he met with Alex, he said, "You're getting sole credit on this because I know what it's like to be someone that's gotten this opportunity, gotten this project to this level, and then have everything taken away from them, and have this moment of, I believe that the next thing after this that you're going to do is going to be even more than beyond what this project is.
Yeah,
And it's the
it's a good
belief
point.
behind in front of the camera that kind of make this thing like pretty unique, because you don't hear a lot of stories like that. That's a lot of what
Yeah.
Altman used to do, and a lot of directors of the past used to do. They would put their print on it, but they'd still leave that screenwriter there so that they can have a career. And it was like reading about stuff like that.
Wow.
That was really interesting, from Affleck's perspective as a director, as well as also as a in front of the scene performer.
Yeah, and as a writer, because we all know Ben Affleck as a solid writer, especially working with Matt Damon. I didn't know about that, and that's kind of a great thing. And many directors do that. Like, I mean, most directors do have a very literal hand in the scripts that they're directing.
Yeah.
Spielberg has even said that many times, but more often than not, he doesn't take a writing credit unless he really has to. Like with regards to movies.
The last writing credit before the Fablemans was what? Like it was
AI.
AI? Yeah, that's 20 years.
Yeah, so the only movies I know of that Spielberg has accredited writing credit on are Close Encounters, AI, and The Fablemans. There might be another one. I can't think of it offhand, but I know of those three for sure. But in many ways, that doesn't mean those are the only scripts he had a hand in writing in.
No.
I mean, in many ways, he probably had a hand in writing all of them, but in some cases, you have to respect the bare bones of what you're given, because those bare bones are what initiate your creativity. So to give Alex Convery sole writing credit, I think is a very respectful move, knowing how this industry operates. So you make a great point that there is something similar going on within this narrative that's also happening as the film is being made from a meta standpoint. It's a really great point. I do, if that is true, like what you're saying, and it sounds like it is, because Ben Affleck has said it himself, I do respect that. I really do. And especially knowing that he is a writer. He has written great screenplays before. He and Matt Damon won an Oscar for Good Will Hunting, for crying out loud.
They should have been nominated a couple of years ago for The Last Duel, but that's another conversation.
Alongside Nicole Hoff.
They won some InSession film awards that year.
They did.
I gave it to them.
Yeah, so. But in a case like this easily could have been a situation of Ben Affleck giving himself a co-writing credit alongside Alex Convery, and then all of a sudden this movie is perceived as written and directed by Ben Affleck. And that's a cool thing to see. We as critics like to see the writer and director, but we don't like to see it if it doesn't feel earned, or if it feels like it's disregarding the initial bare bones or the talent of some other writer. And I love that Ben Affleck chose to maintain that here.
Well, a lot of also their new production company that Damon and Affleck have put together, they're essentially putting their crew first more now than they are putting just their cast. I mean, I think a lot of like their profits, they get these high talented, people of editors and cinematographers and costume designers, all these people that work with them, and they get paid their highest rate that they can. And that's put inside the film budget. Yeah. Kind of like just how actors are. And it's been really interesting to kind of read up about how that's what they want to do forward. The behind the scenes people making this movie are just as important as the people in front of the camera.
It's because it's a movie about collaboration. That's what this movie is.
That's exactly what this movie is. And so like you're mentioning, Brendan, like the man has always had a sort of wink, wink, nudge, nudge kind of ability with his movies. He's got a massive appreciation for classic cinema. Yeah. And this is a movie about Jay Ledbetter's favorite topic.
People being good at their jobs. Yeah.
and this is also a movie behind the scenes about people that are very good at their jobs. Yeah. Making a love letter to people good about their jobs. This is like another one of those like 1970s films about, an important issue or something.
It's very much All the President's Men. It's very much in that same camp. Yeah.
And we all knew the end of that story. Yeah. We all knew where that was going, but it didn't make that any less thrilling, and it doesn't make this any less entertaining. Like this is a movie about like people in the theater most likely are wearing the damn shoes that they're talking about on the screen.
That's very true. That's very true.
We know it happened, but it doesn't make it any less entertaining. And when you've got people that, I mean, surprised we didn't think about or mention Damon or Affleck when we were talking about movie stars last week, because they are movie stars, and they are big. They are also a giant success story.
Yeah.
So that's why it's another reason why they probably respond to Michael Jordan, because they came from nothing too. I mean, Michael Jordan was not the most highly regarded basketball player coming out of high school, and he wasn't considered like the unanimous number one pick and everything. And he had to keep proving it, improving and improving it throughout his entire career.
Yep.
And so, like, just as Damon and Affleck have had to do that, because like people, we might take them for granted a little bit. You know what I mean? Just how great they are. And I think that that's what kind of responds to it as well. Like, it's a very meta film, but it's also too just like, man, I don't think I've heard a crowd react to a physical object like seeing the Air Jordans on screen like I did when I saw it at the Paramount for South by, because like people ate that scene up, and then audiences have been. It's one of those too. You think, oh, okay, well, maybe I'm just the one that really likes this movie because it vibes with me. It's got good vibes, and people just kind of are now connected to it. And I really enjoyed seeing the reactions to it.
I saw at a 1 p.m. showing on a Wednesday afternoon or Thursday afternoon, and I think I was one of it was less than 10 people in the theater. It's an awkward time for sure. Yeah. And even in that kind of environment where there was limited capacity, there was a vibe and an energy from the theater that was reverberating through this experience. Like I could, people were laughing loudly, and there were audible laughs. And I don't mean to make this comparison that they're similar movies, but when I saw Dungeons and Dragons in a packed house, the amount of laughter I heard in that experience was way less than this experience with Air. and okay, maybe it was just the audience I saw it with, so it's not an apples to apples kind of thing. But this is a movie that I think people are going to find, whether it's now or in a couple months, maybe a couple years. I could see this one being one that people discover because it's very reliable, it's very sturdy, and it's kind of hard to get movies like this, these process movies made like this that are that reliable. And the more we talk about it, I rank this as maybe my third favorite directorial effort from Ben Affleck. But when I look at all of his films, with Gone Baby Gone and even Argo, I mean, I can think of a few things that I don't like about those movies. With regard to Air, while I don't know if I love it as much as those, I can't really think of anything I actually dislike about this movie.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to to really kind of pinpoint I wouldn't say a flaw, but something that keeps you from giving it a good score.
I mean, maybe I would have liked to see a little bit more of. I mean, again, it comes with the territory that Michael Jordan's really not a character here at all, and that's just kind of the point. But his desire to not just get royalties for the shoe that he is wearing that has his name on it, but how this is going to help not just other athletes like we talked about, but also other inner city kids and other families. That's not really dwelled on that much, but we know that that's a topical issue nowadays. So maybe the only thing I'd think of is maybe we could have seen a little bit more of that from a socio-political angle. But again,
if you do that, then it might lose.
Well, that becomes a different movie, I guess.
It becomes a preachy element, what I mean. It becomes you're then doing a history lesson rather than doing something else other than that. And I mean, it is a history lesson, but it's a loose history lesson.
Yeah, so I don't know what the right answer is there. Again, that's not really a flaw. It's more just my way of saying, if we're going to tackle something that has a socio-political edge to it, should it go harder? And maybe it shouldn't. Maybe the fact that it merely exists and that it's top of mind right now is enough. And I think this film is kind of aware of that. So, I think it's a very good movie. I don't know if it'll end up as one of my favorites of the entire year by the time we get to the end of 2023. It's still very early for that, but I do really like the film quite a bit. Do you have any final thoughts as we round out this conversation on Air?
Oh, man. Shout out to, again, the wig department for Ben Affleck's hair. I mean, good God. Shout out to the glasses, the whole look. Shout out to this now being Quentin Tarantino's favorite film of the year with his feet up on the desk the whole time.
Oh my gosh.
That was pretty interesting. Shout out to Bateman, who I think is criminally underrated, I think, in this movie already. But like, because a lot of people are talking about Damon and Viola and Viola, but Bateman's great. Messina,
Yeah.
I like that scene where they're talking about the initial deal between the two of them. Like, this is why you have Matt Damon, because Matt Damon is so good at working with other actors and just being able to feed off their energy. And a lot of actors are doing different things here, and he's able to kind of hone them all in. I commend Matt Damon for this performance. This might be one of the best ones he's had in years. I would say.
Yeah. It's another wonky, kind of strange performance. Not like The Last Duel, but similar in concept as The Last Duel. But it's still kind of grounded. It kind of bridges that gap nicely.
Yeah, I think. I mean, this movie's just. I mean, the when Tempted played, the song Tempted played right as the Jordans were driving up. I'm like, okay, this movie knows exactly what it's trying to do. Like, I'm just like, good for you. And yes, to have a movie that also understands, if you're going to mention Born in the USA, to actually talk about the actual significance and what that movie is or what that song is really about within this movie. Thank you, because good Lord, do enough people in this world still not understand what the hell that song is about? While also
it's
just being
not
a banger.
Really a pro-American anthem.
No, it's not. And I love the way Bateman kind of delivers that too. It's like it's a really, again, it goes back to that sort of cheekiness that the film has. Marlon Wayans at that table, the sort of setup there with the joke. One of the funniest things I've seen this year so far. The conversation on the phone with Viola Davis at the end with her and Matt Damon.
It's good.
I got a little emotional. I thought it was just like, it was a beautiful tribute to Miss Jordan, as well as also just to a lot of parents that are right now trying to help their kids, specifically in I think right now with the way deals are happening out there in NIL and a lot of stuff. Like, we see a lot of parents ultimately take advantage of their children right when they have their paydays and stuff like that. And she's clearly looking out for her son. And if you've watched anything about Michael Jordan, you know how much and how important she was, as well as his father.
Yep.
Julius Tinham, who is also Viola Davis's husband in real life.
That's so cool.
It was such a great choice. And he worked with Ben Affleck like 30 years ago on Dazed and Confused, and remembered him to bring him back to this. They have impeccable chemistry. It's that kind of living chemistry of being a married couple that kind of works. It's a movie that's just operating on its own pace and really understands what it's trying to do, and is kind of just like any sort of cynicism or jokes about it outlined. They don't care. They're going to make this movie, and they've been sort of unabashedly, behind it from the get-go. And really, Affleck's talked about this being one of the best things he's ever done in his career, not just from his artistic standpoint, from his health, his mental health standpoint. And I mean, if he's going to be starting to make movies like this again, Brendan,
no more Live by Nights, no more.
I'm telling you, if he's making more sincere things like this, we're in trouble, because this guy might be coming back this decade with full force. It's a really good movie.
Yeah, it really is. And I can see myself liking it more with time. I think it's going to be one of those movies that just has endless rewatch value. I'm going to try and see it again with Maris, and maybe even her dad, because I think
shout out to dad. You gotta take your dad to this. This is an ultimate dad movie, man.
It's not about dads, but it's a dad movie. There's a big difference, and that's very much
that dad bod, White Claw, tucking in your polo into some khaki shorts kind of vibes.
The dad bod is kind of a joke in this movie with regard to Sonny Vaccaro.
Yeah,
actually, the final scene of Sonny Vaccaro is one of the funniest things in the movie. I'll simply say that.
That's the track sequence. Oh, hilarious! Yeah. I'm telling you, you're right. This movie is genuinely funny.
It is a comedy. Like, it's not labeled as a comedy, but it might as well be. I mean, Argo was kind of funny too. I mean, you had John Goodman in a very funny role there too. But this is the closest that any of Affleck's directorial efforts have come to just being a straight up comedy.
Oh yeah, I mean,
and I think that's great about it.
The gag at the cafeteria is hilarious.
I agree.
Ben Affleck showing up late to the meeting is
the way he
the way
tries
it
to
comes-
script that out, and he's like, it's so obvious that you planned this crap.
I know it's so awkward and it's so good. And I'm telling you,
I'm
just
so
like,
busy, I'm so important, but this is more important. You just sound like a freaking robot.
I mean, like, Brendan, we're gonna have to do this on a top 5 one of these days, but like top 5 comedic performances from dramatic actors. We're really going to have to do that down the road. You know,
Yeah.
like they're mostly known for dramatic stuff because they've been, you know, this movie comes out. You've been getting a lot of stuff about Gosling recently, you know, with the Barbie trailer and people, you know, remembering The Nice Guys. Like,
Yeah.
these dramatic actors, man, they're like really good at like coming in and stealing these scenes
you know
and
what it
being
is?
really funny if they're sincere.
I think part of it is because they have a sort of comedic edge that we've just never really seen before, because comedic actors, we see so many of them that there's maybe like some connectivity in the way that they approach comedy and whatnot. But dramatic actors have a very different way of going about it, that it almost seems like you're seeing a new comedic edge become invented. Or maybe it's because we always associate that actor as something else, so that when they veer off their normal path, it's almost that much more exciting. So to see Ben Affleck kind of doing that here is, I mean, he's done comedies before, but this has a very different kind of edge to it that I laughed a lot. I think he's very effective in the movie. And I think the movie is overall very effective. I very much recommend everyone go and see it. It's one of those movies that even if you don't love the movie, you kind of have to recommend it. I feel like
go see it in a theater.
Yeah.
Go see it in a theater, please. For love of, I know that this will be on like Amazon Prime in like a month or so, or after like 45 days or something like that. But please go see it in the theater, because we bitch and moan enough in this world about how, oh, they don't make enough original movies, or oh, they don't make enough, like, you know, stuff like this. Like, they made it. Go see it.
They made it. Go see it. Yeah.
I don't want to hear complaints anymore. Go see it. It's a good movie.
Movies are good, and this one very much is. If you want to see some more thoughts from us, we do have a full review of this over at InSessionFilm.com. We will eventually have some thoughts on Letterboxd. I know JD Duran, our literal dad here at InSession Film, has seen the film. He'll throw up some thoughts at letterboxd.com/InSessionFilm, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on Air. You can go email us at InSessionFilm@gmail.com, or follow us on all the various social media platforms at InSession Film. We would love to hear from you there, and thank you so much for listening to this epic review of Ben Affleck's Air. Inspired by this movie, when it comes to our main show this coming weekend, myself and Jay Ledbetter will be doing a discussion on the best actors turned directors. So Ben Affleck being a clear inspiration for that. Be on the lookout for that. It's going to be a great conversation there. Ryan, any final thoughts as we wrap up this conversation on Air?
No, just go watch Air and
breathe the air. Breathe the air.
It's coming out perfect right before the playoffs.
Yeah,
the NBA playoffs. So I think it's going to be Bucks versus Suns. It's going to be a rematch of 2 years ago, and I think
that'd be interesting.
But I think Milwaukee's going to take it again. That's my prediction. There you go. You get a finals prediction from me in the Air review.
Yeah, I'm secretly rooting for Milwaukee. I lived in Milwaukee for a little while, so it's kind of.
I like Giannis. Giannis is pretty cool.
Yeah,
pretty cool guy.
But yeah, well timed there for sure. Thank you for everyone listening to this epic review of Air. We'll see y'all next time on the In Session Film podcast. Surprised they didn't play that song.
Yeah. I mean, they put enough in the rest of the budget.